Well, if you take a look at the Occupy Wall Street rallies like the ones that were held today that we just talked about, you're more than likely to see signs that address everything from fairness to healthcare and, of course, social justice. But what's often less clear is what, if anything, underpins all the various slogans, chants, and cliches that are ubiquitous, not only at Occupy events, but at the heart of the American left itself. It's something we've spoken about often here at this table, but as if to hear it from Democratic leaders, they're advocating what's pragmatic or what works, what's scientific. Well, luckily for us, editor-at-large of the National Review Online, Jonah Goldberg, wrote a book illuminating this very topic entitled The Tyranny of Clichés: How Liberals Cheat in the War of Ideas. The book was released today, and it's our pleasure to have you at the table.
Hey,
welcome.
It's great to be here.
Great
in
to
this,
see
your
you.
sort of James Bond villain compound here.
Underground layer.
Yes, we are hatching world domination.
There's a whole Batcave vibe to the place. Trying to get in there. It's really kind of cool.
So, Jonah, I want to ask you, you talk about how progressives couch their ideology in very fair things like science and pragmatism.
Right.
How do they do this?
Well, the basic argument in the book is that, look, conservatives and libertarians, and also Marxists and socialists, but I mean, how many of them live outside of captivity on college campuses today, are honest about our ideology. We say we have an ideology, we have a set of principles, we have an approach to politics that we say maximize freedom, limited government, whatever, the usual stuff. Liberals, on the other hand, refuse to concede that they have an ideology. They're constantly, as President Obama liked to say in his inaugural, saying, I only care about what works. So the issue is not big government, small government, it's what works. As Jonathan Chait, New Republic writer, famously had this piece, liberals are simply pragmatists and empiricists and fact finders. They care about sound science and all of the rest. And the simple fact is they're lying. And they're lying first and foremost to themselves, because it is in fact impossible not to have a worldview or an ideology.
So they believe this about themselves?
They believe it about themselves. And so one of the reasons why you constantly hear these people bitching and moaning, oh, why can't we get beyond, like the no labels group, why can't we get beyond labels? Why do you have to keep bringing up these silly, partisan, disagreements and all the rest? Because they actually think that all of this stuff is fake. They don't think that there are actually real principled disagreements. And so, automatically they go to arguments that say your side is holding its positions for secret motives. You can't actually believe the things that you're saying. It has to be because you're being paid by the Koch brothers, or as it's now a growing movement, because your brain doesn't work properly. There's this whole new science about this now. I wrote about it in USA Today. Or that you're suffering from false consciousness, as the Marxists used to say. And so they're always questioning the motives of the right. I've been saying for years the best working definition of a fascist is simply a conservative who's winning an argument, right? Because if they don't want to hear what you just had to say, fascist or racist or homophobe or this or that phobe. And meanwhile, since they can't admit they have an ideology of their own, it manifests itself in weird places. And it actually comes out in these cliches, these sort of tropes and truisms and turns of phrase that sound harmless, that sound like they're just, reasonable things or good things. Social justice. Who can be against social justice? It's social and it's justice, And in reality, they're deeply loaded ideological arguments. They're sort of Trojan horses that they're trying to use to win arguments unearned by argument, unearned by debate, unearned by facts. And so, they'll say things that sound like they're reasonable. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And people say this all the time, as if this is a serious thing, as if this is something that sane people say. And if you take it seriously, it is the most profoundly idiotic thing imaginable. I mean, the idea that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter as a general rule, I guess that's true if the other man is an idiot or a terrorist sympathizer, but some terrorists are not freedom fighters and some freedom fighters are not terrorists. And to sort of blithely dismiss it as a radically ideological move masquerading as sort of pithy little phrase.
If, in fact, they're not just pragmatists, if there is a common ideology that they're unwilling to admit to themselves, tell us what it is. What is their common ideology?
Well, I mean, if you go back to it, I would say it's sort of, sometimes they wake out of their little dream states and their little conferences and they will talk about moving forward and progress and all the rest. But certainly when they're talking to everybody else, it doesn't come out. But I would say, look, the basic thing is progressivism. I mean, the whole reason why we call liberals today is because they so destroyed the word progressive that they had to switch to liberal. Now they've so destroyed the word liberal that they have to move back to progressive because nobody remembers what a bad word progressive used to be. And they're really have a high burn rate through progressive, so I don't know what they're going to go to next. But essentially it's a fundamental dogma that that the government, that the state is the engine of history. That is what moves society. It is, you know.
Well, did you see the MSNBC ads that look what government has done for, you know,
right.
humanity?
I mean, Obama's slogan today, forward, as if we elect the president is the guy who moves society forward through the great wheel of history forward and all this stuff. You know, it goes back to Hegel and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not saying that all these guys actually consciously know all of that. It's just sort of a fundamental leap of logic that they make.
And you have to be if you're a progressive, you have to be statist. There's no other way around.
There's no limiting principle with the, you know, everyone says that conservatives are dogmatic, right? That we're dogmatic and closed-minded and all the rest. But the reality is, I don't know a conservative or a libertarian who isn't constantly debating where the lines in our dogma should be drawn and redrawn. We're constantly having these arguments: freedom versus order, liberty versus virtue, you know, all these sorts of things.
We fight, yeah.
I mean, that's the essence of it. That's one of the reasons I love conservatism and I love the right, is we argue about our dogma. The left doesn't argue about its dogma. That's actually why it's called dogma.
And I think I've heard you say this, that the dogma essentially is the state should do good wherever it can.
It should do good when it can, wherever it can.
And
there's no limiting principle to it.
These cliches reinforce that.
Right.
I want to say, first of all, you have the best book cover I think I've ever seen. Honestly, I think it captured the essence of just, I absolutely adore it. Plus, it looks like a hippie boyfriend I once had, so maybe that's why I'm sympathetic.
It's supposed to be sort of an occupier.
Yes, that's exactly what it looks like. But I want to ask you about diversity. This is something that interests me, something that the left always claims as its own, when in fact they often hate the idea of diversity, particularly diversity of thought. But you have a quote in your book. It says, "But at a deeper level, the agenda behind diversity is about power. It is a way to give permanent license to social engineers." I found that really fascinating, where you linked the notion of diversity and social engineering from the left. Can you just tell us a little bit about where you were going with that?
Sure. Look, I mean, the old argument about affirmative action, whatever its flaws of implementation or logic, was a serious moral argument. It was simply that, you know, as Lyndon Johnson himself put it, it is not fair or just to take a man who's been in chains for his entire life and then expect him to compete in a foot race day one, right? And so there was a certain argument that certain people who were seriously wronged by the government and by the society needed extra help. That argument has sort of evaporated, and now it has been replaced with this permanent argument that diversity is a good thing in and of itself. And the reason why it's scary is that if you say that diversity is essential to education, if you say that diversity is a permanent value of social justice that must be imposed, then you're saying forever government planners, administrators, or whatever, have the right to decide which populations, which people, which colors of people, which sizes of people, which flavors of people, all these different things, how many we should have in any one institution. And the logic of the diversity argument is a permanent argument. It's not a temporary remedy for a serious problem. It is a permanent empowerment of the state or the power holders to do what they want to do. And the problem with it is that, among the problems with it, is that they have a very obviously pinched idea of what diversity means. Right. You know, it's diversity is to help the people that we want to help and to hurt the people we want to hurt, and to fill out quotas conceived of by bureaucrats' paperwork. It is not a celebration of diversity qua diversity. It's just a celebration of our power to be able to pick and choose winners and losers as we see fit.
In government, I saw diversity is strength. That was actually a slogan that I used to see. It was on posters on the wall.
Oh, that's all over the place.
Diversity is strength. No one ever explained what that even means.
Well, and that's what the thing is. That's how they try to steal the base, right? I mean, and it's just not true that diversity is strength. Sometimes it is. Your stock portfolio, diversity is strength, right? Carbon-based steel, diversity is strength, right? I mean, it's stronger because it's diversified. The NBA, with a quota of 25% midgets, not stronger, right? One-legged men in marathon races, not stronger, right? And that's the point, is that they want to win this argument about diversity as strength without actually getting into the details of it. And one of the fascinating things is you actually do, Robert Putnam, liberal sociologist at Harvard, did a study. It turns out that more diverse societies in America get weaker. Social coherence falls apart, social engagement falls apart, civic virtue falls apart. I'm not saying that therefore we should have no diversity in communities. I'm just saying that it is not a gimme that diversity always makes places better.
So if liberals are convinced themselves that they have no ideology, and people in our business have been saying as of late that this is proven by the fact that there's this death of the moderate Republican, unless, of course, you look at, you know, Ben Nelson and Heath Shuler and Blanche Lincoln and all the other blue dog Democrats that no longer have a party to call home. So the truth is, of course, we're both ideological, but we're getting a little more polarized. Is politics living on the edges now, or have the edges just moved, do you think?
I mean, well, look, one of the problems, and all you guys know this, is that it used to be that the political parties were geographic coalitions. So they were coalitions of interest. So it was farmers and farm states and all these kinds of things. And so you had really seriously liberal Republicans, and you had seriously conservative Democrats, and you know, you look at FDR's coalition, it's a bunch of communist Jews and Klansmen. I mean, it's just an interesting bunch, you know. It doesn't work that way anymore. We've had this ideological sifting where if you're a conservative, it's almost guaranteed you're a Democrat. I mean, a Republican. And if you're a liberal, you're almost guaranteed to be a Democrat. And I don't know that that's all that bad, because it's not like the country wasn't divided into liberals and conservatives before. It just wasn't divided into Republicans and Democrats the way it is. And a lot of people, especially like my colleague at AEI, Norm Ornstein, he looks at Washington and says, oh, it's terrible because the Republicans aren't doing what the Democrats want. Oh, that's not so terrible on my way.
AEI? But anyway, that's another debate.
Exciting panel after
exactly. But I want to ask you about your USA Today piece that was published today with the title "Republicans Have Bad Brains?" ? And you talk about this new fad of phrenology and trying to figure out, like, conservatives think one way and liberals think another. Well, first of all, I would wonder how they deal with converts. Like myself, I was liberal all through college and become conservative till after. You and I
got dumber, obviously.
Right. But also, why would someone who has put in the blood, sweat, and tears to earn a PhD to get to UCLA or NYU actually devote his time and resources and energies to such quackery? I mean, what is the attraction of investigating if conservatives and liberals have different brains?
Well, again, it's a fascinating intellectual history of this. I mean, someone should actually do a whole book just on this topic, because this was a huge issue in the 30s and 40s. Theodor Adorno and the Marxist school, Frankfurt School Marxists, did this whole thing about how conservatives had a psychological defect. And now it's the same argument. It's just moved into neuroscience. They said the brains are just wired differently, but it's the same argument. Conservatives are iffy and wrong. There are a couple scientists who now argue that liberals are more evolved because the natural state of humanity is to only care about your tribe and be bigoted and all these kinds of things. And so liberals are the more evolved species. I mean, it's always self-serving to liberals. It's always finding proof that liberals are better, right? And if you do just a simple count of the studies, it's something like 5-to-1 studies of the conservative brain versus the liberal brain. Right? So clearly they're trying to figure out what's wrong with conservatives. And if it was remotely even-handed, it would just be a bunch of studies about why are liberals the way they are and all the rest. There is a lot of good science that says that people's brains are wired to process information differently and all that kind of stuff. But you're absolutely right about the question about converts. And not just you. I mean, Reagan Democrats, the neoconservative movement. I mean, you have all these guys who were Trotskyites and Stalinists who become, you know, arch conservatives. And I've seen no evidence that their brains changed. But that's the issue. And they're constant. And the studies themselves are so weird. I mean, these weird studies where they invite a bunch of people in Nebraska to get in the lab and spot M's and W's on a video game screen for half a second. And then the reporters write it up because the liberals have a fractionally significant better score on these things, which I think could be attributed to the fact that, hey, maybe they're more comfortable taking orders from guys in lab coats. I mean, there could be all sorts of reasons for it, right? All sorts of biases. And the press writes it up. Liberals are more comfortable with complexity. Liberals are more comfortable with new events. You know, really, because they played this video game, you know, where you spot M's and W's. So I'm not saying that there aren't real differences in brains, but the interpretations wildly outstrip the reality of it. And it's all a way of delegitimizing conservatives.
Well, very interesting stuff. We love it. Thank you for joining us, Jonah. Good luck with your new book.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, his book is called The Tyranny of Clichés. Pick it up alongside of Buck Sexton's book.